really enjoyed your energy on the radio today. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's the future of Republican Party.
How are you? Konnichiwa.
By the way.
Standing for the principles which are not to outgrow the military. Please have your credentials shown. We are sign holder.
I'm a public radio.
Very good.
Yeah. Did you enjoy your 2 hours?
That was good. By not being a sitting member, so they don't it frees me up to do a better job as president. A little bit down. Baggage. That's right, baggage, yeah. It's interesting, you know, they've all been there for a long period of time, and of course we've got this mess. That's right, and so they should take some responsibility.
You do that.
You're a public agent? Did Jose get your card? Where is it? Jose? Right, you need her name tag.
Yeah, if you need a studio when you're there. Okay. We're around the radio facilities at WSUI. Okay.
And we'll see what we can do.
I hate to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Certainly.
I'm just wondering about this format. It seemed to be the first format where you did seem to get somewhat equal. Then you got the second question instead of the 20th question.
Yeah.
What did you make the format itself?
I like the format. There's a natural structure against me, and that is that they're sitting members of Congress, and so they can talk about what they're doing right now. Now that has a plus and a minus, because what they're doing right now clearly isn't enough to solve the problems that are going on. So they're not doing a good job. You know, when they talk about education, Obama's on the Education Committee, Hillary's on the Education Committee, Dodd's on the Education Committee. They're talking about all the things they're passing, but they're not pointing out the fact that what they're doing is not good enough. And if it's not good enough when they have power as a member of Congress, what are they going to do when they're president?
You seem to almost want to come back and clarify your initial answer, or elaborate on your initial answer about Iran.
Oh, yeah.
Iran never posing a problem. What about the hostage crisis? What about...
Well, the hostage crisis, well, first off...
What about a whole bunch of stuff going way back?
Well, going way back, yeah. Let's go all the way back to 53, when there was only two democracies in the Middle East. One was Israel and one was Iran. And we're the ones that destabilized the democracy in Iran. We, the CIA. That's us.
So the problem you just attributed to our foreign policy over the years, in that sense, they're not the problem, we're the problem?
We are the problem. Of course we are. And so what happened when we put a tyrant in position, they overthrew him, the Ayatollah came in, students took over our embassy, and then the government realized, well, the students have got control of all these people at the embassy. So they hung on to him for over a year to embarrass us. And then as a result of this embarrassment, Ronald Reagan sold weapons to them in exchange for money that he could get into Nicaragua. And we're trading weapons with them. And then he negotiated with them. We don't negotiate with terrorists, of course, but Ronald Reagan does. And then after that, we continued to sanction them for 26 years. For what? They weren't doing any harm to us. They'd given us back our hostages. So why do we have to sanction them? And then we hear now that they're giving weapons and they're helping kill Americans. There's no evidence of that.
So in this debate today, I mean, what do you think was accomplished by focusing on those three issues that they focused on? And for your campaign in particular, what do you think was accomplished here today?
Well, with respect to my campaign, just being here helps in that regard, because I'm cut out by the Democrats. This was not the Democratic Party. If I was waiting for the Democratic Party, I would not have been able to appear, because Howard Dean has made it very clear that I am not to appear at any Democratic function that the National Democratic
Well, I
Party
saw
has
your video.
control.
I saw that new video that's out. There was just you're making that point. What was that all about?
Well, it was
Was
all
that your
about
idea, or was this the producer's idea?
the producer's idea. But what it was all about was that I'm being denied a voice in the Democratic Party. That's what it's all about. And so here's the Democratic Party. It's the war party, you might add.
The Democratic Party is the war party.
Well, wait a second. Everybody's jumping on Hillary for voting for the Lieberman resolution. Well, what about the majority leader, the majority whip, the chairman of the committee, and the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee all voting for this within an hour after this thing was brought up? It was all orchestrated to happen. And so we all pick on Hillary when this was the Democratic Party in the Congress that brought this about so that George Bush could go to war with Iran. And thank God some members of the intelligence community in conscience have drop-kicked him by putting out this new information that they've never been going after the bomb since '03.
So what do you think's going to happen, and what's going to happen to you on January 3rd?
Well, I don't think
What
I'm
kind of
going to do. I'm not going to do very well on here in Iowa. I haven't even campaigned here. I've been here. This is the second visit.
Where are you going to catch on?
Well, where do I catch on? Maybe I'll catch on in New Hampshire. Maybe I'll catch on in Nevada. Maybe I'll catch on somewhere where the American people want to hear a fresh approach, where the problem is not with the people and the leadership. I keep saying the answer is with the people, not their leaders. But if they want the leaders that they got, they deserve the government they're going to get. Follow the money if you want to find out what you're going to get. Follow the money.
Hey, Senator Mel?
Yes.
Can we get a picture of you and Mel Rocket? Do you remember Mel?
I know you do. How are you?
He'd like a picture.
Like a picture.
Go
You got
in front of
enough?
the map.
You got enough?
I don't want
Hey, the cookie was a good try.
But cookie,
Your eyes were closed.
your eyes are closed. Yeah, it's just
my eyes are closed.
Yeah.
How could I do
You
that?
have to blink every now and then.
Are they open?
Yeah, that's
Thank you very much. Oh, you what's that? Yeah, you're right.
Where did you interview me?
For the Tonight Show, I went to your apartment in Plano. Remember? That
Yes.
piece?
What are you doing down here?
Just hanging out.
Hire you or something?
No, he shares me. There's
no Leno right now.
There is no Leno, yeah. Yeah, he shares me.
Sorry.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay, we'll do it.
That to you or he's holding it?
Tell him, I'll call him as soon as I get done.
I probably shouldn't shake your hand as John. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for doing all you're doing.
How's the cookie? Is it good?
Not made in
You're
China.
good? Do you have lunch?
Not made in China.
Brownies.
I love Chinese cookies.
Yeah, the brownies.
Where?
Yeah, the brownies.
Cake or
yeah.
fudge?
They're very dense.
Oh, I think it's probably fudge. Let me stick it up. We'll try one. I'll try one. I like cake. Yeah, I'll try.
They're
Can't pass
too
up.
crunchy for you.
I'll try.
At least we can do it. On your Well, these have a red radio.
How are the brownies? Has he tried it?
We're about to find out.
Wait a minute. They look pretty fudgy to me.
They're very fudgy. They weigh about 5 ounces.
Yeah. They are pretty fudgy.
You definitely need some
Yeah.
late night snack. Senator Lavelle,
Yes.
do you feel, I have a feeling that I know your answer to this question, but that the moderators in general, in pretty much every debate you've been in, do not give you your due say?
No.
No.
That's right. They don't.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
Probably because they don't consider you as, front runner, and so they think people don't want to hear from you, and so they're not going to hear.
There's elements of that.
What else?
Plus, there's elements that they're steeped in conventional wisdom. And what I talk about is beyond conventional wisdom. Mm-hmm. Let's take the question on the whole issue of immigration. Mm-hmm. They're all beating their brains out on immigration. Mm-hmm. We've been beating our brains out for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Now, is there something about that we don't understand that maybe...
What are we missing?
That's right. Mm-hmm. What we're missing is the fact that we can't solve it because we're not approaching the issue the right way. And what did I say? I said, well, employment is just about what it should be, 2.5, 2.7%. So that means we're almost fully employed. So if we've got 13 million people, illegals, working here, and we're at literally full employment, what does that mean? Nobody's taking anybody's jobs. Okay? So it's a non-problem. So now why is it been created a problem? Well, you got the nativists, who, those are the people, they just got off the boat and they don't want anybody else to get off the boat. So they start agitating on the extreme. They make it a wedge issue with their extreme people. So rather than just leaving them alone with their extremists, then the middle group now takes this up. And so politicians in the Congress will take it up and they get a piece of legislation. And so we go through a decade of playing with the legislation like we're going to do something like there's a problem, when there really isn't a problem. Now you compound when the media, like these very intelligent people asking these questions, buy into this big time, and I start talking about where's the problem. I'm talking beyond their comprehension.
I do think you raise a lot of really good points that kind of bring everybody outside the box, which is such an important role, no matter what happens.
I was going to try to do that with China and didn't get my legs.
Yeah,
in.
I'm disappointed.
I was just saying,
NPR.
trying to get the demagoguery of it. Everybody's against China. These people got to eat too.
Yeah.
There's 600 million of them in poverty. I mean, if we had a fraction of that problem, we couldn't begin to deal with it. And the Chinese leadership is dealing with it. And then they asked the question, well, how would you deal with them? Put pressure on them on the human rights at the UN. Well, what about China dealing with us at the UN when we invade Iraq without a reason? What about Guantanamo? What about the rendition? How's China supposed to deal with us? How can we dare to think of the arrogance of the question of an American media person who's knowledgeable about all of this and talks about, well, how are we Americans going to tell those Chinese about human rights? But you begin to see, so when I come in and talk like that, this guy is from nowhere. Now you know why I don't get the time, because and I noticed that Michelle went on one of the questions, was sort of hurrying me up, and then when Obama was talking about some platitude, oh, don't hurry, just take your time. It's part of conventional wisdom. Part of conventional wisdom. Really?
We noticed that
Even
right away. Even we're with
isn't that? Well, let's discuss that.
you guys know that.
Go ahead. I want to hear your comments on that. That's very perceptive. That's very encouraging to me. No, I'm going to repeat it.
Senator, how are you?
Very good for my age.
Very good.
Just had a wonderful cookie.
A big topic today. And comments and reports that were released with President Bush and his administration as far as regular food product. What is your stance on that?
Well, first off, I want to commend the intelligence community there's some people of courage and air and morality, because clearly the Congress has joined with George Bush in building a climate where the American people are prepared to accept, 52% prepared to accept that it's okay to go to war with Iran. And so they saw this happen. And so they stepped forward and said, there's no reason. I mean, they're not going after the bomb, haven't been since '03. And so now, what's changed? Clearly, this is going to change American opinion. It hasn't changed the opinion of the White House. They still want to go to war. Now, what will happen in March, April? I don't know. Maybe this thing will be abetted by then. But clearly, this intelligence information has drop-kicked the White House and drop-kicked the Democrats in the Congress who are joining George Bush on the issue of going to war. But now what you see, and you heard in this debate, was given credence to the fact that Iran is a problem because they give economic aid to Hezbollah and Hamas. They're entitled to do that. We give aid to Israel. So what's wrong with that? So Iran, and then they say, well, Iran is shipping in weapons. There's no evidence by American military that any of the bombs that are being used to kill Americans or any of the training that's taken place has come about out of Iran. And so that is fabrication and lies. So here we come back to the situation. Iran has never waged war for the last 150 years, except when they defended themselves against Saddam Hussein, who invaded them at American instigation, and America helped Saddam wage war against Iran, gave him the chemicals so that he could use the chemical weapons.
I'm interested to use the term like World War III, no matter who you're talking about, when it's the president. Does it have implications?
The implications? It raised the price of gasoline at the pump. It raised the price of oil from $65 a barrel to almost $100 a barrel. Our president is well nigh irresponsible. And the fact that the Democratic Congress sustains him in many of his ridiculous situations is just appalling. And that little wonder that the Democratic leadership does not want me to be party to any debates. I'm a Democrat that believes that when my party's doing the wrong thing, I'm going to criticize it. Because if you criticize it, you can now change it. But if you don't criticize the party that you care about, how are you ever going to improve?
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Okay.
Good debate today, though.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't get a chance to hear it.
Not bad. I didn't get as much time as I wanted, but it was okay.
This is what the NPR wants to do is schedule you for Talk of the Nation.
Oh, that's great. That's good.
She was waiting here just a moment ago, but she couldn't wait any longer.
Would she take me right then?
No,
and there?
no, she
to do it
wants
later.
to schedule you.
Oh, okay, done.
Okay, I'm going to call her right now.
Yeah, call right now. Thank you. Oh,
Signing the song.
maybe
You
lost
on your
her.
words on immigration. On your words on immigration. Well, it was the first time I've been waiting for somebody to say something that made sense.
Oh yeah, we're just so crazy on this. Leave it alone. Open our borders. Blow up this fence we're building. You want me to sign yours too? You want that? Even though it's Obama. Who cares?
Here, you can sign it. I got Dennis's. You can sign it. There you go. You can sign it too. But yeah, I haven't got a chance to actually hear what you have to say. I work with the immigration group here.
Well, I'll tell you what. Give everybody green cards. Let them do what the hell they want. They want to stay here. Let them become citizens. No punishment. None of this stuff get at the end of the line. My God, these politicians always think we're going to punish them. They want to talk about dishonesty. Go look in the Congress. You'll find some dishonesty.
Are you concerned about terrorists getting in at all?
From Mexico?
Yeah.
God, no. Drug dealers maybe, but not terrorists. No,
You don't think they
and
do
of
it?
course,
I mean,
no,
seems
not
pretty
at all. Not at all.
easy.
No, they come in. They come in by first class from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, you're probably
Yeah.
That when you sign that?
Get their own visa.
No, they got no
Oh,
problem.
here.
Okay, we have it.
I don't know if it works very well.
Whatever works.
It's a Sharpie.
Hopefully I won't color my sweater.
Keep it up.
Yeah, until it dries.
Want me to hold that for you, Dan?
But now what was the point you were talking about?
Oh,
that you
terrorists.
perceived,
Oh,
you perceived
yeah.
how NPR was treating me.
We don't work for.
No, I know.
Right,
Forget
right,
who you
right.
work
Okay.
for. But you perceive that the way I was being treated
I've only
was a little.
I watched the YouTube debate and then this. Those are the only two I've seen, and both you got pretty snubbed.
Yeah.
So.
And I was in the YouTube. I was really so surprised at the level of ignorance
Yeah.
of the YouTube crowd, and I was surprised of the level of is it ignorance? I don't know. To a degree, the word of ignorance is too harsh. Of Siegel and Michelle. When Michelle made the statement, well, the Chinese, are building up this military might. My God, they're 10% of us. 10% of us. Russia is 3% of us. I mean, who are you afraid of? The obvious question that is never asked, and I don't quite get a chance to do it, why do we spend more on defense than all the rest of the world put together? What the hell are we afraid of?
Why didn't you come to the black and brown forum?
Oh, is it?
CCI.
Not come.
Here's another problem.
God had his hand over me and said, "You're not going to go." Friday night, I get a call 11 o'clock at night. Your plane is canceled. I was flying out of Baltimore, so I call up. Couldn't get staff, so I call up myself and I make a reservation next morning to leave out of Reagan. I get to Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay. Cancel the flight. Now this second cancellation to Des Moines. So what do? I go rent a car.
Yeah.
I rent a car.
Oh my
I
God.
meet two of Joe Biden's people. We get in a car. We're 5 miles from the airport in this terrible storm,
Yeah.
and we get a flat.
Oh my
On the left side of the road, we're going south. And so, fortunately, this guy was there. He's an attorney. He says, "Senator, don't get out of the car. You get out, change the tire." He gets out, and of course, we're slightly tilted. The jack that they had could not jack up the car high enough. We're an SUV, high enough to take the tire off. This is a Ford.
Yeah.
This is a Ford. The same normal jack that for a car they use for an SUV. Safe, very clever. So now I call AAA. I'm a member. 3 hours to get to us. Wow. 3 hours. Now it's a 5-hour drive to get the bait, and it's 12:30. Okay. So then they come in there. They change the tire. We go to the place because we had a donut on. We got to repair the tire.
Yeah.
They won't repair it for 2 hours. At that point, I gave up.
Yeah.
I quit. I'm going to take a hotel. I almost had to work on a couple of chapters of my book. So I took a hotel, stayed there for 2 days. And all I could think of is somebody did not want me to go to that debate. I mean, there's too many coincidences that happen.
Yeah.
And I used to be a cab driver, so I'm pretty heavy driver.
Really?
And so with all of that ice and snow and storm, I'd have been barreling out down that road and could have got myself in a serious accident.
Yeah, it was
So I'll
bad.
take the philosophical approach. I didn't show because I'm not a great believer in God, but God didn't want me to go.
Yeah.
So that's what happened.
Your voice was missed, that's for sure.
And
But they didn't
I
let
would have
Priscilla
loved
speak
to have loved
anyway.
to because it was my issue. Do away with war and drugs, turn around and cut this crap out over immigration, let them in. They want a job, it's a job, work, no work, leave. Treat them equal. None of this stuff. Stop this. They're illegal. They're not illegal. They're doing a job. As long as you're working. Now, if they're loitering on the streets and they're causing a problem, that's fine. We can deport them. But if they got a job, boy. And the test, this is what I was saying up there, when you get around 4.5% unemployment, you're literally all full up. All the jobs that are wanted, because you've always got a 3-4% changeover. So all the jobs that need to be filled are being filled. They're not taking anybody else's job.
Yeah.
And so it's the nativists. These are the rednecks that they have, the racists, and that's what this is all about. And then it's crept into. And then when we talk about these issues, why is it that the Congress over a 15-year period can't solve the problem? Maybe it's because the problem is not solvable the way they approach it. So that's what I tried to say in less than a minute. I'm getting the hustle.
I did get that though.
You did?
Yes.
Great. Then I'm more articulate than I realize.
No, you definitely were.
Well,
It came across.
it's funny, you do, and I always surprised that I do get it across when many times I'm harder on myself. I wish I could have said that better.
Yeah, I know.
But you do what you do.
Everybody does that.
But
Especially
it's
when
interesting.
you get to your position, I imagine
well,
it's even greater. But
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
And
it
thank
was
you.
great to meet you. Best of luck with everything and with your job.
Thank you.
I hope they go better than you.
Yes, yes. Doesn't get any worse.
Well, thank you so much for coming today. It was a pleasure.
It's a double out there or something.
She's my boss downstairs. She's the station manager, and I was saying, good to see you and always to hear you and
I agree. Well, thank you very much.
Get out there. I'm gonna get out there in public radio.
When I heard so nice here, you
I
can
will.
see us.
Money and politics is the corrupting agent. So therefore, things that bring most money are maybe this is the year this will be overturned. Maybe this is the year.
Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you personally. Bye-bye. Safe travels.
Work harder, work harder.
Okay, let's talk about the war on drugs. Considering all the money, time, effort, and resources this country spends enforcing our drug policies, why do you think we keep fighting the war on drugs despite the obvious failures?
Very difficult to understand. I think it's got a racist touch to it because what we do is we're able to incarcerate a sizable portion of the underclass, which could be causing problems in the economic area. And that's the only thing I can think of as a logical reason. Otherwise, it is just stupider than stupid. We know that the Prohibition was a total social failure in the 20s. It brought about a disrespect for the law. It created a mafia and criminality. And people drank more in speakeasies than they ever did before the Prohibition. Now, we saw, once we put that aside, that things came back to normal. And alcohol is still a problem, but we regulate it, we tax it, and we can live with this problem. Now, the same thing with the war on drugs. If we can put aside the war, it's the war that ravages the inner cities, not the addiction. Addiction is a public health problem. And there is no addiction with respect to marijuana. Marijuana is not a gateway drug. Marijuana is not addictive. In fact, the opposite. It has some healing qualities. And so I would totally deregulate marijuana, permit it to be purchased at liquor stores, and then turn around and take hard drugs and permit them to be issued by a doctor, by prescription, and filled in drugstores. This way, you remove the entire criminal element from the process, you stop the profit from the process, and now you can begin to deal with the addiction problem straight away. And you save unbelievable sums of money that can help deal with the addiction problem. And of course, when I'm talking about saving money, I'm talking somewhere between $50 to $100 billion a year that we've been spending for the last 25 years. This is ever since Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs in his first term. This has got to end. This level of stupidity cannot continue. We can't afford it, first off. And what we've done is we've filled our prisons, and that's causing another problem that has to be dealt with.
With all the violence and poverty we've seen in our inner cities, and considering the number of minorities incarcerated because of drug offenses, do you think civil rights leaders like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson are avoiding the issue by not pushing for the legalization of drugs?
Yes, I do. And I've been on Al Sharpton's radio program, and he was in the audience when I raised this issue, and he has not responded. And I think that not only Al Sharpton, but he's not running for president. I fault Barack Obama. He's a black man, and he should have some natural tendencies to empathize with the black people in the inner city. And he doesn't do it. He doesn't do it. And the most important thing that we could do for the inner cities is to end the war on drugs, which is savaging the inner cities, and most particularly the black and Hispanic communities.
Have you been embraced by any other civil rights activists because of your commitment towards ending the drug prohibition?
I haven't been embraced by anyone. The only one that's taken an interest is Harry Belafonte.
Okay. If it's so harmless, why is marijuana still illegal, and why does it seem like so many politicians and law enforcement officials seem so determined to keep it that way?
I don't know. I just don't know. They've all tried it. They all tried it, and they all know that it's not addictive, because if it were addictive, they'd still be on it. I just don't know. There are certain mysteries of human nature that are difficult to divine. Why we continue to mutilate ourselves with stupid policies is difficult to understand. I come to this conclusion: it's our leadership. It's not the people. It's the leaders that lead us astray, and that's the reason why I want to empower the American people to be able to make laws, because that's the central power of government. Not voting. On election day, you give your power away. I want you to have your power 365 days a year, and so that you can vote on all the issues that affect your lives.
Okay, let's talk about Iraq. Why do you think we went to war with Iraq?
That's an easy one. General Sanchez told us that a month ago. We went there for the oil. I was saying that in the spring of 2002 that we were doing this for oil. Barack Obama, in the fall of 2002, after the vote in the Congress, said, well, we shouldn't go to war. Well, he didn't tell us why we were going to war. He didn't tell us any particulars. It just intuitively, he took that position. Well, he was right. But we went to war for oil, and the reason why we're staying there, and he's party to our staying there, and that is that we're staying there to keep control of that oil, because we're getting about 2 million barrels a day out of Iraq ever since the beginning of the war.
Do you think the Democrats in general are relying on the occupation to help deliver them a victory next year? With all the tough talk from the Republican candidates and with our war-weary nation, it seems like it might work.
Well, it might not. What the Democrats they've gained control of the Congress on the basis that they would end the war, and that they're not ending the war is going to have a reflection on them. The only thing that's operating in their benefit is that the Republicans are worse on the issue than they are. But what you see, if there was an alternative to both the Democrats and the Republicans, then that alternative might win. 67% of the American people are fed up with both parties. Both parties are war parties, and the American people are not war people.
If Bush won't sign any legislation for withdrawal, why doesn't Congress just play hardball and not send him any money at all for this war?
Well, they don't have the guts to do it. And they could force him. You could force Bush to end the war. All you'd have to do is override a veto. And you could override a veto by overwhelmingly having vote after vote, day after day after day to override. And you would see eventually the votes turn in favor of overriding the veto. I think it might take 30 days, but that would permit the American people to weigh in and pressure those who continue to vote for the war by voting to not override the veto. And this is a plan that would work. I put this before the Congress last May. They've not raised a finger to do it. The Congress just does not want to exercise this kind of leadership, or for that matter, any substantial kind of leadership.
Let's talk about impeachment. It seems like there's a million reasons why we should impeach Bush and Cheney. So why isn't this happening?
Well, here again, it's because the spinelessness and the lack of leadership in the Congress, even if they weren't able to pass a bill of impeachment, that they should begin the process and have the hearings and develop the record. But I think talking about impeachment is very important because these people should be impeached. But it's more important than that. These people should be more than impeached. They should be prosecuted criminally. If an FBI agent came to your house and asked you questions and you lied, you'd be committing a felony. What is it when the President of the United States lies to the American people, or the Vice President? Is that more than a felony, particularly when thousands of people die as a result of it? That is criminality in the highest form, and it should be prosecuted. If I become President of the United States, I can guarantee you that is the approach I will take, and we will have justice. You can count on that.
How important do you think it is for the American people to acknowledge that the President and his administration lied and deceived the public to take us to this war in Iraq?
I think it's very important because if you don't hold leaders to a standard of justice that ordinary citizens are held to, what you do is you create a disrespect for the law among ordinary citizens. And what keeps civilization together is respect for the law. And that's what these people do to us. They trash the law and our attitude towards the law and damage civilization itself.
I guess more specifically, what actions would you take to hold all parties responsible for the deception and the lies that took us to war accountable?
As I travel around the country, I'm very frequently asked what I would do about 9/11 and about the possible conspiracy. Well, I don't know if there's been a conspiracy, but I do know this, that it would be very important to have a new commission that would look into the whole issue, and that commission should have subpoena powers, and that commission should mandatorily place everybody who is subpoenaed under oath, and that they should start subpoenaing the President of the United States, George Bush, the Vice President, and everybody else under them. And if they commit perjury, or if there is evidence that's brought forward of criminality, then you would have a case of, even though they're no longer in office, of going after them criminally for what they did when they were in office.
Moving on to Iran, what are your thoughts on the recently released national intelligence estimate on Iran and their nuclear weapons program that they probably will never have? Seems to me you've been right on this issue the entire time. Would you care to comment some more on that?
Exactly, and not only that, well, first off, it's people within the intelligence community who are moral, who have knowledge of what the White House is trying to do to go to war. And so by releasing this intelligence estimate, they sort of have drop-kicked the president in his ability to go to war. That doesn't mean that 6 months from now they can't revive this. But at least right now, they've really sabotaged their efforts to pursue the war, and efforts that were sustained by the Congress and the media. So I really applaud that. But the problem is that everybody is sort of buying into the fact that Iran is a problem. Iran is not a problem. Iran has not been to war for 150 years. Iran is not a threat to us. It's not a threat to its neighbors. Iran is a very substantial country. Iran used to be a democracy. If we would leave them alone, they would undoubtedly become a democracy within a generation. And so by our continuing to consider them an axis of evil, we turn around and question them why, for them having influence in their area. This is their neighborhood. They have influence. We're not in their neighborhood. Why should we have influence there? Again, we charge that they're putting in weapons in Iraq and training. We have no evidence for that. The American military has not come up with any evidence to prove that at all. This is all speculation, and of course, who can believe what this White House is telling us in any regard? The other is that they're supporting Hezbollah economically and with weapons, and Hamas. Well, these are two elected governments. They're entitled to support the governments that they feel represent the interest that they have. We support the government that we want, Israel. Why can't they support the people that they want to support? Now, if we want to see a diminution of violence in that area, maybe the Israelis and the Palestinians ought to be able to make peace. And that's the answer, not turning around and trying to demonize and create a war with Iran, a war which would cause a world depression in the minimum and probably a nuclear exchange in the maximum. That's the policy of George Bush and the Democratic Congress that sustained him in that policy.
How foolish do you think this makes all the other candidates look with all this tough talk, with all the tough talk that's going on about Iran, and now we find out that apparently they're not as big as the threat is?
Well, it makes them look real foolish. And then, of course, Obama today in the debate making a statement of, well, yeah, no, they're bad people because they support Hamas and Hezbollah. What does that make them bad? Does it make us bad because we support Israel? Does this make us bad because we support Taiwan? I mean, this is ridiculous to demonize people because they have natural cleavages with areas of interest and culture that they hold. This is really not a way to deal with the problem. At this debate, they were trying to really demonize China. How ridiculous that is. China is a very significant country with very difficult problems, and they're handling those problems a lot better than we are handling problems in this country.
Okay, moving on to the fair tax. I guess, why? Why a fair tax? I know you're the only Democratic candidate who actually supports fair tax.
Our system of taxation is corrupt. The income tax is designed to benefit the wealthy and to place the burden of support for the government on the average American, and it gives nothing to the poor. That's the system we have today that's sustained by Republicans and Democrats. Now, what I think is we need a system that will turn around and help the poor and take the burden off of the back of ordinary citizens and transfer it to the back of the wealthy. And the way you do that is with a retail sales tax. Because the sales tax would operate in theory exactly the way the income tax works. In theory, the income tax is the more you earn, the more you pay. But that's not the way it works. The more you earn, the less you pay because of the tax code. But now when you got a sales tax, the more you spend, the more you'll pay. But if you have no exceptions, and I would not permit any, then what would happen, it becomes a very progressive system, and you can make it more progressive by giving rebates for the tax that would be paid on the essentials of life. That's what you would have now is a very progressive system, and for the poor, this rebate that they would receive, somewhere between $400 or $500 a month, would be the first time that they would receive money on a normal cash flow basis in all of American history. Because they would be receiving a tax rebate on the taxes they would be paying on the essentials of life if they could afford the essentials of life. Now that's a progressive tax system. And everybody would know what everybody else is paying, and then they would go get their paycheck and there would be no deductions from their paycheck. What it would do, it would change our society from a consuming society to a saving society. And that's the only way we could begin to address the problem of our deficit, our fiscal gap on the order of $50 trillion.
Now, I know you said that you want to do away with the IRS, but I guess one question that comes to mind, wouldn't we still need the IRS to enforce our tax laws, even if we did switch to a fair tax system?
No, it's not hard to enforce a sales tax. Not at all. You know, most states have sales taxes, and so what you do is you'd remit a portion of the tax collected to the state for collecting it, or the local government, or you'd remit a portion of it to the business for collecting it. So it would be self-policing in that regard. And with respect to sending a rebate check, well, The Social Security Department is good at sending out checks, so they could send out those checks, and so you wouldn't need the income, the tax, the IRS. The other big significant thing that we don't appreciate is that the amount of money that it takes for the private sector to comply with our present tax system is on the order of $270 billion a year. That's half of what we've spent in Iraq in the last 4 years. Half. And we spend that every year in the private sector to merely comply with the tax laws that we have.
Immigration, we talked about that a lot this afternoon. How big of a factor do you think racism is playing in all this public outrage over illegal immigration?
I think it's a big factor. Not only is it racist, it's worse than that. It is scapegoating, because we know we're failing as a nation. We're failing in education, we're failing in healthcare, we're failing in our defense, we're failing in our crumbling infrastructure. And what does a nation do when it fails? Well, it tries to blame somebody else. And so what do? We're blaming these brown people coming in from Mexico for our problems. And they're not causing any problems. What we have is about 4.5, 4.7 unemployment. That is about max. That means our society is literally fully employed. So the 12, 13 million people over here, quote, illegal, undocumented workers, are filling jobs and they're not taking jobs away from anybody else, because we're full to the gunnels in employment. So now, if you were to chase those people away, who would fill those jobs? The people aren't here to fill those jobs. And that's what the problem we have with immigration. For the last 10, 15 years, we've been trying to deal with the immigration problem, and we haven't been able to deal with it because it's not the problem that we've defined. It's a scapegoating problem, and media, the Congress, people that bought into this, just leave it alone. People come in here, take a job. When the job is finished, they can go home, or they can choose to stay here if they want to file for a green card. Okay?
Senator Gravel?
Yes, yes.
Do you want me to operate for you?
Yeah, do you want to? And then you can be in it.
Nah,
He's gonna set
I'm not
up,
a screen hog.
Okay, go ahead. Next question.
What's the difference between civil unions and marriage? I can't figure it out myself.
Marriage, first up, there really is no difference, except that if people choose to use the word marriage, they should be able to. You want to keep in mind that marriage has been appropriated by all societies from the beginning of civilization. And all marriage does, it's not owned by a religion, it's not owned by civil society. It is a word, and what people mean when they get married, it means that two human beings are in love and want to make a commitment, and they call that marriage. And I don't care if it's two women, if it's two men, or if it's a man and a woman, they should be able to define that as a marriage. And the fact that they do that, it does not disparage from anybody else's union, whether you call it a union or a marriage. And why people should get uptight over that is just something very, very deficient in those people's attitudes.
Speaking of religion, do you think religion today is totally corrupted?
Sorry.
Do you think religion has totally corrupted our political system as of lately, or?
Well, I think religion damages the political process. Religion should be separate from politics. That doesn't mean that a person shouldn't have a morality and be informed by that morality in politics. But when you have organized religion getting involved in politics, as Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and others attempt to do, they do a disservice to their congregation, they do a disservice to religion, and they do a disservice to the body politic. These are two separate endeavors, and whenever you combine them, you corrupt the process of both.
Now, I read somewhere that you grew up, you were raised as a Catholic. What do you think of the Catholic Church today? I mean, I myself was raised Catholic. I'm not too religious anymore, but I was very angry during the 2004 election. I remember being very angry hearing about certain priests, different priests, saying that they should deny communion to politicians who support abortion and women's and the right to choose.
First off, when I left the Catholic Church, I did not leave it out of anger. I consider myself, if anything, a deist or an agnostic, whatever you want. I do believe there is a force that none of us understand. I sort of lose interest as religion or beliefs become formalized in religion. Then it becomes a power process. And I think as Lord Acton, who was a great Catholic, defined that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that applies not only to politics, it applies to religion. And so I am not angry over the Catholic Church. I have a sister who's a nun. She is not very supportive of the Pope in his present views, or the last Pope in his views. One of my great heroes in all of life is John the 23rd, a Pope in the 60s, who at 78 years old became Pope, and in 4 years changed the Catholic Church more than had been done in 500 years. Now that's leadership, and that's the reason why I admire John the 23rd. And so with respect to now the other problem the Catholic Church has with respect to pedophiles, it's very, very tragic. I would hope that someday that celibacy would no longer be a requirement of the Catholic Church, and that priests could get married so that they can enjoy normal lives, enjoy sex and sensuality, which is a gift of God. And there's nothing wrong with that gift. It's to be enjoyed. And that they are deprived of that, I don't know if that has any gain at all, or any advantage to their being able to counsel people in the difficulties we have in and out of marriage, and in and out of a successful life.
I guess one more before I pass the mic. They say if we don't fight them over there, we'll fight them over here. What's stopping Iraqis from getting in a plane and coming over here and just going nuts on us anyway?
Well, first off, the Iraqis have no interest in coming over here. Insurgents are people like our Minutemen. It's their country. They are insurgents because they want us to leave their country. We are an occupying army over there. And so as far as they're concerned, they want us out of there, and they're surging as insurgents to get us out. I would do the same thing. If I were an Iraqi citizen and I was over there, I would become an insurgent. So they have no desire to come over here. Now, Al-Qaeda is a whole different situation. And I'll promise you one thing, that if we pull out of Iraq, the Sunnis and Shia will take care of Al-Qaeda big time. They'll take care of them. We don't have to worry about that. So no, what we need to do is to take a whole different approach, get away from militarism, bring about peace between Israel and Palestine, and then we'll begin, and then reorganize the United Nations, bring about global governance, treat people like we would want to be treated, the golden rule, and you'll find a big difference in how we are treated, how we act. That's essentially the approach I would take. Okay?
9/11 truthers, given the number of people that think that 9/11 was an inside job, what do you think that says about the current state of affairs in our country, that so many people distrust our government?
Well, they have good reason to distrust the government because the government operates in such secrecy. I don't know enough about the elements of 9/11. I would say this. I become president, we will have another commission that will investigate all of that. And as I pointed out earlier, that commission will have subpoena powers and will cause everybody to take a note. And so as we subpoena George Bush, the Vice President Cheney, and many, many others, we will then develop the record, and if these people commit perjury, they'll be prosecuted, And if we develop information that shows culpability or criminality, they'll be prosecuted for that, regardless of what position they occupy in public office.
Okay. I know I asked you about the Council of Foreign Relations. There's a lot of conspiracy nuts that.
Leave that alone, Al.
Okay. New Orleans.
And Federal Reserve, leave that alone.
New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina. How would you have handled the situation?
Well, you'd have some people of competence who would be, one, the emergency response should not be part of Homeland Security. In fact, I probably would wipe out Homeland Security. I don't think we need it. I think it's a boondoggle. We don't have any more security than we had before. I think what we do need is to have a response capability for natural disasters so that we can, one, evacuate areas in the event of a natural disaster, so we have the capability to go in full force to deal with the needs that result from a natural disaster. And so that means appointing people who are competent and developing the plans and practicing and implementing these plans just as the military do in implementing their war plans.
What would you say to Ron Paul supporters to try and convince them to jump ships and get behind your campaign?
Well, I have substantial elements that are libertarian. Ron, I think, is a little more of a purist in that regard. He says that he's not going to be running for president as a libertarian candidate. I don't know. I would certainly invite the libertarians to join my candidacy and support me sometime in the future. Who knows how and when? But I would be honored to have them as. And I know that there's quite a number of libertarians in New Hampshire that will be voting for me in the primary.
Would you consider running as an independent if things don't pan out?
That's a premature question at this point in time.
Okay. How big of a disadvantage do you see it as being an older white male in a race against potentially the first black, female, or Hispanic president?
Well, I don't think it's a disadvantage. I think that what's a disadvantage is I'm running in a culture that doesn't really respect age. If I were running in most other cultures, I'd have an advantage where they respect age and wisdom, and not in our culture. And that's unfortunate, but I think that can be overcome. I think as the debate warms up, that people will appreciate that with the experience I have, having served, having had my ups and downs, that I bring a lot to the table, particularly a moral judgment. I said from the get-go that anybody who voted for the war is not fit to be president of the United States. I truly mean that. Even if they've changed their mind, it's a matter of judgment. If you can't understand that as president you have really a great deal of power over human life, if you can't exercise that from the get-go, then you should not be president. And that would go for Obama, even though he didn't vote for the war, but he seems totally incapable of providing leadership to end the war.
Last question, two-part question. Is the American dream dead, and was it ever real?
The American dream was real right at the Declaration of Independence, when we stated that all human beings are created equal. It died in Philadelphia in 1787, when the leaders there cut a deal with the devil and enshrined slavery and perpetuated the theft of land from the American Indians. And so we've lived with that scourge throughout our history. Can it be reborn? I think so. I think that we can turn around and provide global leadership if we start out by accepting that we are no better than anybody else in the world, and that we are all equal as human beings. There's enough resources on this planet to take care of everybody's needs. It's our lack of management ability that causes the problem. When we take a foreign policy and treat it that our selfishness is superior to anybody else, what we call our vital interest, that we are prepared to fight and despoil other people for our selfish interest, that is no different than me as an individual saying that I am going to put my selfishness above anybody else individually. It doesn't work on a personal basis, and it doesn't work on a national basis. And so that has to change. And that's the kind of leadership that I will bring to the office of president. One is the hallmark will be love. Love is the most important element of leadership. Love empowers courage. Courage empowers our ability to implement all our other virtues. It stems from love. Love, it's easy to love your friends. It's your enemies that you have to work at. And once you work at that, you can break those barriers and bring about peace in the world. And there was a question asked today that they never got around to me. What will my administration be known for? My administration will be known for bringing about global governance of the entire planet with a sense of equality, not America above everybody else. I'm a human being first and an American second, and my priorities are in that order.